Welcome everyone to our Harvest in Action 6th grade farm camp. My name is Ann Vogt and I am the farm camp program director, and I have the super coolest job ever because I get to connect your teachers to awesome farmers like Bruce Tiffany today and farmers all over the state of Minnesota so that you can get a behind the scenes look at agriculture happening all around our state. Bruce is going to be making his way back towards our camera woman here, and he is going to talk to you all about harvest today. Now you can see on the ground, maybe we'll do a practice question. Throw in the chat, what are we going to be harvesting today? Are we harvesting peas, soybeans, corn, rye? Alyssa's standing on the leftovers that have been combined already. So go ahead and throw it in the chat. And let's see what you think we are harvesting today with Mr. Tiffany. And yes, staff, one more time, just a reminder, we're going to be asking a lot of questions. I absolutely love that I can see so many students because Bruce is also going to be asking you to raise your hands or shout out an answer. We're going to keep you on mute just so we can keep things moving, but we want you in the chat. Yes, we've got corn we are harvesting today. I was with Mr. Tiffany yesterday and we were harvesting soybeans in a very interesting triangular field. And today he's going to have you guys up in his combine harvesting corn. All right, Bruce.
Hello.
Are you on? Oh, there he is.
I'm here.
Excellent.
Hey, sixth graders. I'm glad you could join us. Now, some of you probably, most of you were on the fifth grade tour last spring, and I'm welcoming you back to my farm, and I'm hoping that all of your questions get answered, but I'm looking forward to this. I have been looking forward to this for some time because I really enjoy finding out what's on your mind and showing you a little bit about what it is that we do and why we do it. So welcome. I'm making my pass along here, and my friend and employee, Ramon, is driving the grain cart next to me, and he's catching the corn as we're coming toward you. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as this progresses. So you understand that I'm harvesting corn, and last spring, we planted this corn the last week of April. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about it and why that's significant. But it goes from a seed, and then the seed gets planted and it emerges from the soil and it grows, and now harvest is here. And I'll tell you what, the life of a farmer revolves around planting and harvesting. Those are the highlights, I think, for every farmer. That planting time is such an optimistic time, and you've got ideas and a fresh start. And it's kind of like going to school every year, the first day of school, and you're excited and whatnot. And then at harvest time, it's like a big test. You get to find out how good of a job you did. And some things we can control and some things we cannot control. And the biggest thing we can't control is the weather. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that after you get into the combine with me. But I'm coming up to the end here in a little bit, and then I'm going to hop out and we'll go through some stuff.
Just because I know we are not going to be able to cover everything, Bruce, yesterday when I was in the combine with you and we were combining beans, you had no one with you. Can you explain how harvesting beans and harvesting corn with the grain cart is different?
Sure. So if you recall, when you were fifth graders, we talked about corn and soybeans. And corn the yield, and when I say yield, the amount of grain that is produced on an acre or in a field is so much more. It's a lot more than with soybeans. And so with corn, you have to get the corn away from the combine and put it someplace, and that requires more people. Whereas with soybeans, you can generally, it's possible to work alone, but it's a little harder to do that with corn.
Perfect, thank you. All right, as Bruce is getting out today, I want to see a show of hands. Raise your hands, even if your camera is off, that's okay. How many of you have seen corn being harvested in a field? So raise your hands if you've seen it. Good deal. Keep your hands up if you've been in a combine and harvested corn. Keep your hands up. Awesome. So we've got a lot of you who have been engaged in farming by being in the combine. And so that is exciting. And later, maybe you can give your own experiences, share your own experiences with your classmates as we walk through Bruce and Alyssa's experience today. Excellent.
So while Ramon is unloading that grain cart, and it's going to be a little noisy, so that's why we don't want to go over there right now. But while Ramon is unloading that, let me ask you. So sixth graders, I don't think your teachers were involved in the fifth grade tour last year, so maybe you can help them understand what it is that I do. So I told you last spring what I do and what every farmer does, and think of these fields as giant solar collectors. So see if you can remember what it is that I told you that I do. And then the other thing is, on my farm, I grow corn, soybeans, and rye. And all of the soybeans are for seed. And that seed, or the soybeans that we harvest, will go to other farmers to be planted in their fields the next year. And the rye, same story. We grow rye for seed, and other farmers will plant that. So it's a little more specialized than the average farmer. And the corn has various uses, but it's just like everybody else's corn. There's nothing terribly special about it.
All right,
so
Bruce,
right now,
we are still waiting on our responses. He gave you a hint. Sixth graders who were with us last year, or if you rewatched Bruce's spring planting, he made a comment about solar collectors. So remember, Bruce doesn't just harvest corn or soybeans. He harvests what? Do you remember? Oh, Alyssa's giving you a hint.
Alyssa has heard my talk several times, so. Any ideas? So these fields, think of these fields as giant solar collectors. And what does a solar collector do? Any ideas? There's this, well, the sun is behind the clouds, sure.
Yes, he does not harvest clouds. Hint, hint. All right. Oh, Mrs. Winchell's class said energy. Mrs. Pope said uses sun power. And Mrs. Frank says collecting the sun.
All right. So you are all on the right track. You are all on the right track. So solar energy is exactly right. But how would we collect that? And what I do, and what all farmers out here are doing, is we're harvesting sunshine and we're putting it in a form that people can use. So when I say, think of these fields as giant solar collectors, you have to have a growing crop out here to capture that sunlight. And that sunlight is helping produce something that people can use. And in this case, it's corn. In a field right over here, it would be a soybean plant that collected that sunlight, and it's going into the soybean plant and then therefore into the beans. And the same thing with rye or sugar beets or oats or peas or sweet corn. All of that is being collected and put in a form that people can use. So let's go over here to this wagon. Think back to your 5th grade days, and I was talking about how amazing corn is. So if you look at this basket, if we look at about this blue line on here, that would be approximately a bushel of corn. So a bushel of corn weighs 56 pounds. If I planted a bushel of seed in the spring, then we would plant approximately 36,000 seeds per acre. Okay, so they're planted, if you look at the stalks, they're spaced evenly. So the planter puts them in the ground and spaces them evenly. And then one seed grows into one stalk, and on one stalk, you would have 1 ear of corn, okay? But if I planted all of this seed, if this was seed corn, a bushel of it, do you remember how big that pile would be at harvest time? Anybody remember that? If I planted this much seed, how big would the pile be at harvest time?
A wagon full, Mrs. Frank says.
Very good. So this wagon is about 550 bushels. So think about that. I planted this in the last week of April, and this little amount of corn turned into this amount of corn since then. So it went basically May, June, July, August, and somewhere around the middle of September, it was all done growing and it was all done capturing sunlight. And after that point, then it just had to dry down. But it was that many months. So May, June, July, August, the middle of September. So you've got 4.5 months to turn this amount of corn into this amount of corn. I think that's fantastic. That's one of those things that amazes me every year, and it has gotten better. So when I was your age, if we would have planted about this much seed when I was in 6th grade, we would have gotten maybe half of the wagon full at harvest time. So, and if you recall soybeans, if I planted, I would have to plant approximately 10 bushels of seed in order to fill this wagon at harvest time. So the question that Mrs. Vogt asked about why we have to have more people at corn combining, because the volume of crop is much larger. So let's go back to the combine and we'll take a ride. I'll tell you what, before we do that, let's go to the combine and talk a little bit about what it's doing. So if you look at the corn plants, they're all standing there. A lot of them are still straight up and down. Some of them are tipped over for various reasons. But on that stalk, you generally have 1 ear. And the whole objective here, the whole idea is to get that ear off the stalk and to get all the individual kernels off the cob to go into the wagon. So the machinery that's required to pick this, get all the kernels off, separate all the trash out of there, and get the clean kernels in there is pretty amazing. And there have been machines like this for a long time, but at one day, people used to pick all this by hand. They planted it by hand, they took care of it by hand with hose and pulled weeds and whatnot. And then it wasn't too long ago, it was like oh, possibly your grandparents' age or maybe your great-grandparents' age, school was let out in the fall so people could help do the harvest. And you'd have to walk along and pick each ear of corn. They would pick the ear of corn and throw it into a wagon, and there would be a team of horses pulling the wagon along. As you would walk along, the horses would pull the wagon and you would toss the ears in there. And then when you got the wagon full, you would take it to the yard and you would shovel it out of there. And that's how harvest was done. And then, oh, somewhere in the early 1900s, machines were developed. The first ones were pulled by horses, and then somebody said, well, maybe we should pull that with a tractor. And then eventually we got to the point where we had a machine that was self-propelled. You could ride in it. And so machinery has come a long way, but essentially it's all the same. We are trying to take the kernels from that and put in a wagon so that we can take it to the grain bin. So let's take a look at the machine.
As you're walking over there, Bruce, we've got some great questions. So classes know that if I don't ask Bruce your question, it's because I know he's going to get to that question coming up soon. Couple questions that you, Bruce, really quick. You made a comment when you were talking about the corn and the wagon that there was only one cob of corn per stalk. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and you know, it would seem like if you had a stalk with multiple ears, that would be a better thing. As it turns out, when that corn plant is growing, when it's very small, it determines how many ears and how many kernels it's actually going to produce. And corn has been bred for maximum yield, or for not only maximum yield of grain, but also the quality that's in it. So a certain protein and oil and starch, that's all bred into it. And what they found is if you can have a corn plant that puts all of its energy into one good ear instead of 2 or 3 smaller ones, it's a better crop. And so part of it is because it yields more, but also part of it is because it's easier to mechanically harvest it if all the ears are similar in size. So it's a good question though. So while you're coming up with the next one, you notice these points, these dividers, and they're going to be going down between the rows, and the row of corn is going to be coming in here. And in here, there's 2 rollers that are going like this, and they're grabbing that stalk and they're pulling it down, and that ear is going to come slamming down onto these plates right here, and it'll break off of the stalk, and then these chains will carry it into the machine. So it happens really, really fast. There's a lot going on, and it's kind of amazing. So once it gets into the machine, then there's a big rotating, let's call it a beater, going around inside of there, and it's spinning around and it's knocking the kernels off. It's knocking the kernels off. And then can you come up here, Alyssa? So inside there, this part in here, this is all spinning around, and the kernels are going, or the cobs are coming in there, and that is knocking the kernels off, and they're flying out through here. They're all coming out here, and then they're gonna go down in here on these sieves on the bottom, and these sieves are shaking back and forth, and there's air blowing up through them. And that's going to separate the grain from the rest of the plant material. And then the rest, it's just basically elevating it up into the grain tank, until we can get it unloaded. The other thing that's happening here is we're measuring everything. We're measuring the yield. We're measuring, as we're going through the field, we're measuring how much corn we're getting, and we'll see the computer in there. So let's hop in the computer and let's hop in the cab and go for a ride.
Perfect. Well, Alyssa's climbing up in there, and Bruce, you're getting into, we've got a question about cost. How much does a combine cost today?
Well, that's a good question. So they're very expensive. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't priced one this year. This machine is a 2019. So when I bought this with a corn head and a bean head, we probably would have been right about $900,000. So just shy of $1 million. So right now, if you were going to buy one like this, you'd be over $1 million for the machine.
Wow, thank you. Keep the questions coming, students and teachers. Bruce is going to go into now what we're going to see. The best part, in my opinion, sitting in the combine.
So isn't that cool? We're going about 5 miles an hour, and we're taking 8 rows at a time. And right now, we're harvesting approximately 12 acres an hour. So if you look at this basically it's an iPad. If you're looking at this iPad, it's telling you we're doing about 12 acres an hour. It's this part of the field is 15.5% moisture corn, and right now it's yielding at about 150 to 160 bushels an acre here, but the field average is 173. So you'll see that change as we go through the field.
Can you say that one more time, Bruce? Just, that's a lot of numbers to take in.
Yep. Hang on.
Just cover the last bit there. That last bit of how much is coming in right now and how much is the average.
It varies throughout the field, but it's coming in at about 100. Well, back there it was 150. Then it just went to 130, and now it's going to go up over 200. I would assume anyway. But we're going to have to go over something here. Hang on just a little bit. So you know how your sink or your bathtub or whatever has a drain in it? Well, right there is a drain in the field. And so the extra water, this happens to be a low spot that like your sink in the drain in your sink is at the low point or the bottom of the sink. And then water would run into it when you open the drain and to get the water out of your sink. Well, the same thing happens in a field. Sometimes we have extra water that runs to one spot and we need to drain it away. And so that's what that is. But rather than having just a hole in the ground for it to run off into, we actually have something there that kind of filters the water before it leaves the farm. So it keeps some of the soil and other things from getting into the stream. So that's what that was. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you there.
That's all right. You're good to go. You know, I think one thing I misunderstood within farming and being in the combine was a lot of times people say, oh, combines drive themselves these days. They don't even need a farmer. And I think it does drive itself at some points, but I love that Bruce knew that that was there and had to stop and slow down and take his time. I think that's really important to know that, yes, these machines are so high tech, but there is something to be said about having a human operator still to this day.
Well, that's a good point, Mrs. Vogt. So it is right now, it is steering itself between the rows. And if you look down there on that middle snout, there's two little orangish yellow things in the middle. And what they're doing is they're feeling the corn stalks. They're feeling the corn stalks on either side, and they're sensing where they are. And so then it's saying, okay, combine, we want you to drive straight between them. And that's what it's doing. Now, sometimes it doesn't always work exactly the way it's supposed to, and we have to recalibrate. But let's talk about that. So I didn't invent that. I use it, and I try to fix a lot of stuff myself. But one of the occupations, one of the jobs that we rely on is mechanics, people that know how to fix stuff. So we've got a lot of machinery, and we rely on mechanics. Think back to the 5th grade tour. I think we had pictures of a lot of people that helped me in my farming operation that I rely on. So we'd have mechanics. We would also have technology people. Right now, we've got an iPad here doing a lot of stuff. We've got this monitor that's controlling the machine, but it's also collecting a lot of data. And then we've got some cameras, and there's actually computers all over this machine, and they're doing different functions. We can scroll through the screen here, and there's lots going on that you don't know about. Not only is the combine driving itself, but the head is following the ground up and down and from side to side by sensors that are feeling the ground and making sure that it's in the right spot so that we get all the corn that we can. And then, yeah. So these things are pretty cool. They've come a long way since walking alongside a horse pulling a wagon. And
Yes.
somebody had to think about how to do this, and then somebody else had to actually make it happen. And I've been farming. Well, if you look right across the road over there, right across the road, that field right there, I started farming when I was 11 years old. So I have put, 53 crops on that piece of ground right across the road.
Tell us a little bit more about you, Bruce, and your farm, because that matches a couple questions that have come through. How many acres do you harvest, or how many acres do you farm? And well, let's go there. And oh, actually, and another question on that, what will your corn be used for?
Okay, good. So, like I said, I started farming this when I was 11 years old, right across the road. I started out with, my brother and I started out with 40 acres there. And eventually, my wife and I bought that farm. It's 190 acres that we own there. But between my son Matthew and I farm together, and between the two of us, we farm approximately 2,500 acres. And it has taken time to put together a farm of that size. It's bigger than some, and it's smaller than some. So we're kind of at a point where we're fully employed. we can make enough money for to meet all of our needs. But we do have one full-time hired man now, and at harvest time we hire 2 or 3 other people at harvest time. So that's kind of what we do there.
Excellent. And really quick, Mrs. Winshittl's asking, do you have any animals on your farm as well as doing your crops?
Sure. I've always had animals. Actually, before I started farming that crop ground at 11, I had some pigs and I had some cattle. And I distinctly remember I was 8 years old and went to the bank with my dad and grandpa. And my brother and I borrowed some money to buy some cattle to feed. And so I've always liked raising animals. But right now I do not have any. However, there are a couple other people that have some animals in my barn. So right now there are some goats, and there's an FFA student. One of the FFA students from Redwood Valley has had a pig project there as well. So it's been kind of fun to see and help a new farmer, a young farmer get started. Just kind of like people helped me along the way. And so I was happy to be able to do that with him.
That's awesome. We have a couple questions about the corn that you are growing and what it's used for. But then another question came in about how do farmers breed different varieties of corn? So if you could talk a little bit about the genetics piece of this and
right.
what your corn will be used for, that'd be great.
So that's an excellent question too. Corn breeding is a very specialized science, just like any other crop development, but an awful lot of effort has gone into corn breeding, particularly around Redwood Falls and Olivia. So they call Olivia the corn capital. And the reason is because there's 14 genetic companies all doing corn research out of Olivia. And here in Redwood Falls, we have Bayer. It used to be Monsanto, now it's Bayer. And we have corn research that takes place here, but also soybean research and soybean seed production. It is the only place in the world that Bayer does all of these things in one community. They do these things in other communities in other parts of the world as well, but Redwood Falls is the only place where it's all done in one community. So it's pretty unique. And the reason is because the people that know how to do it are here. The people that know how to do it are here, but also we have the climate and we have the land resources that make it possible. And so when you combine the right people and the right resources, good things can happen. So there are literally thousands of different kinds of corn seed. You can see right here, some of it wasn't standing very well. So it's important to have corn that will not only produce well, but it needs to stand there and wait to be harvested. So they're developing corn that it yields well and it has a nutritional value to it, but also it will match our climate. So the climate around here is different than, say, the climate in Iowa or in Canada or in North Dakota. So you have to have plants that can use our climate and do the maximum capturing of sunlight here. The other thing is you also want one that not only produces well in the climate, but also with the types of pests that we have. So the different areas have different plant diseases and different insects that attack the corn. And so you have to have the right genetic makeup in order to make that all possible. So it's a very specialized science, and I rely on the experts to do it. In the old days, when the farmer was walking through the field picking corn by hand, they had a separate little box on the side of the wagon, and they would take ears of probably the biggest ears that they found, and they would put in that box, and they would save those for seed. So a lot of times they would take those ears of corn and they would stick them on kind of a wire hanger, and they would hang them in their attic in their house or someplace dry, so that they would be safe, and then they would plant their own seed. But you can't do that very well now, because what they found is if you cross two different parent lines, the offspring of that has better seed than if you just planted one of the parents or the other. And so that's what's called a hybrid, is when you get the offspring from two parents. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was great. Another set of questions that have come in, and again, sixth graders, you are asking dynamite questions. Keep it up. How wet or dry is the corn? So we've got questions on that, so moisture level. And then Mr. Kicks's class asked, so was this a good harvest? Been hearing that we were so dry that the crops were maybe not going to be so great. What's kind of the verdict so far for you, Bruce?
Sure, good question there. So the crop varies in moisture a great deal. So right now, the corn coming in is about 13.3 to 14% moisture. The field is averaging 15.9%. So if you're going to keep it in a grain bin very long, let's say if you're going to keep it until June or July, you need to have it 15% or lower. So a lot of years, it doesn't dry this much in the field, and you would have to dry it after it leaves the field. So it would go through a dryer or some way for it to dry down. So because this corn isn't all consumed in the winter, it is consumed all until next harvest, basically. And it's not just consumed locally, it's consumed all over the world. So it has to be at a low enough moisture level, and that would be somewhere between 13.5 and 15, so that it doesn't spoil. And so that way it is nutritious for the animals or for the food products that it's going into. And as far as the yield goes, in a little bit here, we'll go back to the iPad, and we'll it's recording everything that we're doing. So if you look at this map, I don't know if you can see it, but there's all different colors there. So purple is really low. The purple area there is probably about right in here. It's probably about 0 for yield. It was extremely dry up there on top of that hill, and it basically died. Other areas where it's green, light green to dark green, that's really high yield. If you look at this legend over here to the side, the darkest green is 263 bushels an acre, or then the next shade of green is 242 to 263, and all the way down here to this brown is like 118 to 139. So you can get an idea. This field varies a lot. And right up in here, there's a great big hill. And that hill has a tendency to be drier than the lower ground. Now, 2021 is extremely dry, and that hill is not yielding very well. But in 2019, this was corn, and the highest yields were up on top of the hill, and the lowest yields were down in the lower ground because it drowned out. It had too much water in the lower ground. But in this year, because it didn't rain very much, that heavier, tighter soil in the low ground is where we're getting the maximum yield. Good question.
Another great question coming in from Mrs. Pope's class. Bruce, if all this corn is going into the same bin, how do they sort out the bad corn from the good corn? Explain that.
First of all, we try not to grow any bad corn. So if we know that there's something that is spoiled or is the wrong kind of moisture, we have to manage that. Basically, I can tell you that everything in this field is going to be dry enough to go into the bins. So you can see it from here, right across the road here and across that field are some grain bins, and that's where this corn is going to go. And it'll stay in those bins. I'll probably start taking some out in December, and I will probably have all the bins emptied by, more than likely, I'll keep it all the way, a little bit all the way into maybe June. But I'm really busy at certain times of the year, and so I don't want to be hauling corn out all the time. And so that's why a lot of corn goes to the elevator in town. So everybody's corn is going and commingled together at the elevator in town, and then they're shipping it out as users need it. And that might be loading a train that is bound for Mexico, or going to the Gulf of Mexico and and goes to South America, or we've got friends in Costa Rica with chickens and they get corn from the Midwest. It might go to China. Roughly a third of our soybeans end up in China. And so they go to the West Coast of the US and they're put on a ship and sent over there. But anyway, we have to get it off to the field because winter comes and you don't want your crop standing out here. So you harvest it when it's ready, you put it in a grain bin and store it until the users need it.
And then how much money do you make per bushel of corn? And I know it differs a little bit. So if you can kind of explain why, Bruce, you wouldn't just take all your corn right now to the grain bin. Why do you keep some? Why do you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the price of the corn right now is about $5.20 a bushel. But it varies, it changes every day. It actually changes every minute of every day. Not only during the day, but at night as well. So there's trading, there's people all over the world that are wanting to buy or sell grain. So people that are trying to feed their chickens or their pigs or make cornflakes or whatever need to buy the grain, no matter where they are. And by the way, the United States produces more corn than any other country, but we do not consume all of it. So we produce more than any other country, and some countries can't produce any at all, but they use it. And so they rely on us. And here's the other thing. Not only does the United States produce more corn than any other country, it is produced mostly in about 5 states. So Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, and then states like Indiana, Ohio, South Dakota, those all contribute some. But not every state is very good at growing corn. We can't grow cotton here, but we can grow corn. We can't grow bananas, but we still like to eat bananas. So people that have different resources grow different crops. And so they're harvesting sunshine in a different way.
Absolutely. Educators, I hope you are listening to this presentation and doing what I'm doing, which is, man, we're covering geography and economics and science and STEM, math. It is wild how much goes into farming. Students, as you are listening, I hope you realize that Bruce has had to learn throughout his time as a farmer. You heard him say he started at age 11. If he decided to stay farming the same way he did at age 11, he would not be nearly as successful as he is today. So just making sure I get that across. I absolutely love connecting with farmers because they just don't go out and do the same things every year. They are consistently learning, growing, changing, and making changes and testing the waters. And you can see all the data he's collecting, and they're going to have to go through that data to make decisions for next year. So I just think that's so excellent. Bruce, we've got a couple questions.
Let me tell you a little bit about that. So the year that I graduated from high school, 1975, and I'll just use that as a reference point. So two men, my dad and I working together all day long, we could harvest approximately 2,000 bushels of corn in a day. That's working from morning to night, about 2,000 bushels. If you look at the monitor here, it changes a lot, but this number right here, we're harvesting somewhere around 2,700 to 3,000 bushels an hour, 2,800 bushels an hour or whatever, every hour. That is half again more than two men would have harvested in a whole day in 1975. So think about how amazing that is. A couple of years ago, my granddaughter, Willa, was riding alongside of me, and I showed her that, and I said, Willa, when you graduate from high school, what do you think that'll be? When you look at that, when you graduate from high school, so today it's bringing in about 2,800 to 3,000 bushels an hour. When you graduate in 12 years, what do you think it'll be? And she said she thought it would be double what it is today. And then I said, okay, Willa, how many people is it going to take to do that? So if you're going to harvest double what it is today, how many people will it require to get the job done? And she said the same number of people. Now, I don't know if she's right or wrong, but it's something for you to think about. If there are more people in the world today than there were last year or the year before or 20 years ago, and everybody is eating and being fed, but we have fewer farmers now than we did even 10 years ago, every one of us has to produce more to keep everybody fed. And so for that to happen, we have to have a lot of help. So I can run the combine and I can do the planter and I can do a lot of things, but I need help from agronomists who know a lot about soil science and what it takes to grow a crop. So I rely on them. I rely on somebody to help with crop protection decisions, seed people to recommend the correct seeds. I need lots of people along the way to help me manage my operation. And those are all jobs that are extremely important for the success of farming, but also the success of our community and the state. So it's something for you guys to think about. You may not be a farmer, but there's a role for you to play in this. And I hope you're all working really hard to learn a lot and figure out what that would be.
I love it. We are down to 10 minutes. If we're going to go all the way to 2 o'clock, Bruce, we have cruised through this presentation. I am so grateful all of you students are here, and we're going to keep going, but we're going to do some rapid fire questions, Bruce.
All right.
Are you ready? So rapid fire means you got to answer them quickly.
Yes.
All right. Mrs. Klumper's class from Westbrook Walnut Grove wants to know, how long does it take to harvest all of your crops with your team, you and your team?
Well, our farm is a little bit different because we grow hundreds of different soybean varieties. We start before anybody, and we will probably be the last ones done. But generally speaking, a regular farmer, if they were farming like everybody else here, could do all the harvest in about 3 to 4 weeks. It takes us, because of some of the specialized work, we take probably 6 to 7 weeks.
Excellent. And yeah, there's a lot more on that we could talk about for a while. Bruce, actually, who do you work with besides, farming for yourselves? I know you work with some organizations to grow crops for them. Do you want to share a little bit about that real quick?
Sure. So we have grown seed for DeKalb, and then it turned into Monsanto, and now it's Bayer. We have grown seed for them since 1947. And we have grown seed corn, sunflowers, and soybeans for DeKalb and then Monsanto and Bayer since then. So very specialized. We also grow this rye and we sell it ourselves. And actually, when we get to the other end of the field, I'll point out that rye field because that's kind of an exciting crop. And you can, if you look back here across the road, you can see a green crop being grown out there. That's actually, that green stuff is actually, it was a rye field that was harvested back in July, and then it was seeded to a cover crop that will remain green all winter long, and then we'll plant soybeans into that. So it's a way for us to harvest a crop, harvest the sunshine, and then protect the soil and actually build soil quality at the same time.
I love it. When you are combining, do you always combine the outside perimeter of the field first and then work your way to the inside? Mrs. Pope, I thought this was a great question.
Everybody has a different way of doing things, but on the end of the field, there are end rows. So you have to get those out of the way so you can turn around. I like to go back and forth along the one side of the field. That's just the way our operation works. Other people like to cut down through the middle or something and kind of go in circles. They're going around and around and around, but we go back and forth. So every farm, every operation looks at it differently and tries to be as efficient as possible. Next question.
Excellent. Mrs. Holman's class has a question about gasoline or diesel fuel. How much do you go through in the fall harvest season, or how much do you need?
That's a good question. So this thing, we could actually draw a map. Right now, this combine is burning somewhere around between 12 and 13 gallons of fuel per hour. And so if we're harvesting 13 acres an hour and we're burning 13 gallons an hour, it's taking approximately a gallon an acre to run this combine. The grain cart, that probably is only taking, right now what he's doing, it's probably only taking about 5 gallons an hour. And so in a day, it's probably not even 5 gallons an hour. Our farming operation has changed dramatically. And so we do no-till now instead of a lot of tillage. And so the way we are farming now compared to 3 years ago, we are probably saving roughly 10,000 gallons of fuel per year in the system that we have now compared to 3 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's another great attest to farmers. They are constantly looking at ways to decrease their footprint and increase what they are growing, or create a quality crop.
So in 1975, I'll use that as the reference point again, we were harvesting approximately 100 bushels an acre, and now with average rainfall, we would expect to have something over 200 bushels an acre. Not only that, but we have reduced our fossil fuel use by approximately 85%. So we're using a fraction of the fuel we used to use and we've more than doubled production. So if you're looking at your carbon footprint or your impact on the environment, not only have we improved it in our fossil fuel use, but also soil quality and water health. Take a look at that field over there on the other side of the fence line. That is rye. So rye is an interesting crop. You plant it in the fall, and that will get established and start growing in the fall. And then in July, it'll be harvested. And it's really a fun crop to grow because it's harvesting sunshine now when everything else is not. And then after it's done, after it is mature and harvested, then we plant a cover crop again, and it continues to capture sunlight. And what that's doing is it's feeding the biology in the soil itself, because the soil is not dead. The soil is full of millions and millions and millions of microbes, and they need to be fed. And that's what that cover crop is doing. It's also protecting the soil so that it doesn't blow away in the winter or wash away in the spring.
I love it. We've got time for one more question. And, you know, there are a couple questions on here. I'll make sure to get Bruce's answers and email out to the educators, because you guys asked some dynamite questions and we just didn't have all the time, but I love it.
Those
Bruce,
are great questions.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, did you attend college to learn about farming?
Yes.
And what would be your message to anybody watching this today, students watching this today, thinking, man, that looks awesome, I want to do that too? What would be your advice?
The first thing is you have to learn how to learn, because if you go to college and you learn one way of doing it, one way only, pretty soon that'll be obsolete. So no matter what you do in life, learn how to learn, because everything is going to change the minute you learn it. So learn how to learn, and then be curious and think about it and ask good questions, because good questions will help you understand what's going on. And if you're curious, you'll be effective in no matter what you do. And getting an education, but also getting an education in something that you're interested in that is useful, is really important. You got your whole life ahead of you. Learn how to learn.
I love that. And I think as teachers, we love that too. And you'll never stop learning, ladies and gentlemen. I promise you, you will never stop learning. All right, as we wrap up today, educators, you received an email while we were on this tour with an awesome career lesson. Bruce made a comment about people he works with to make his farm as successful as it is. And in that lesson, we actually have pictures of the people around the Redwood area who help Bruce farm. And there is a matching game that your students can do to figure out what those people help Bruce with so that his farm produces a high quality crop. So go ahead and check out that lesson plan. We highly encourage you to take a look at that. And students, we hope you got such a personal tour today. You can go home and say, I rode in a combine today, and it was awesome. A huge thank you to Bruce Tiffany and Alyssa Hammerschmidt for their time today. This has been incredible. Thank you so much, educators.
I've had a great time, and all of you, share what you learned. Tell your friends and tell your family about some things that you learned today. And when you're driving down the road, looking at these fields, think about what these fields really are doing. And maybe you can play a role in this someday.
I love it. Excellent. Educators, we hope you had a great day. Have a great Thursday, and look for your emails. I've got some more stuff coming at you. Have a great day, students. Everybody wave goodbye. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.